it's going to go in and add this tessellation, or these, these little triangles out here. Now we can go in and start to add pins. Let me zoom in a bit here. I'm going to go to the leg first. And you can see I kind of messed up my selection there. I got something going there, but anyway, I'll forgive that for the moment. Once you go in here and you say, okay, let's start working Puppet Warp, I can go in and click to set pins. Now these pins are places that we can bend, move, shape, and distort this thing. So if I go to the foot here, let's say, and I click and drag, you can see what I can do. A little bit of rubber band action. Now I got to be careful because you can actually distort the image and make it look kind of, well, dumb. I can also edit undo. So what that'll do is it'll go through and it'll undo the last movement I had. Okay. If you want to, you can also get rid of these pins by, just like anything else, if you set anything in Photoshop, we can always Alt-click to get rid of them. You can select multiple by shift-clicking on them. If you click on one, I've got one selected right here. You can also come up, this is one of my favorite features, you can come up and rotate it. Oops, let me click on it again, sorry. You can come up to the control panel and rotate it using what's called fixed rotation. Now if you look up here, hopefully this looks okay across the internet, but I'm zooming in a bit. You're going to see I can use what's called a fixed rotation. That allows me then to go in here and select the value, and I can use my arrow keys to go up and down, or shift arrow up and down. Let me zoom out, sorry. Zoom out. And you can see that it can rotate around a point. Now this is going to look pretty dumb if I bend this leg, but you might want to set a few extra points out there to make it look a little better. I can then go in and start to move things. You can see that if I zoom out a little bit here, we can get him to go back, move things around a bit. If we want to keep things still, I got to be careful. I don't want to do stuff like that because you're going to actually destroy the pixels. But I can start to set some more pins out here to keep things still. That way I can then kind of move just pretty much what I want. The great thing about doing this type of thing is I can click on the ball too and just drag that around, and instead of having to cut it, you can see I can just move it where I want it to. Now I will have to go in. You're going to see it's got a big selection around that. So if I move it down here, it's going to have blue around it. I'll have to get rid of some of that, clean that up. Let me move it up a bit. So once I get it set, I can hit return or enter, and we've got ourselves the boy. Now we can go in and clean up the edges, make it a little bit better looking, that sort of thing, but this is a great way to kind of get started essentially. So I probably should have saved the selection, to be honest, before I expanded it, and that would have been a little bit better as far as doing this type of thing. But so there's using a couple different techniques to be able to work with an image to do some different things to it. It's kind of cool. All right, now I want to close up my files, and I've got two open here, and I don't want to save them because maybe I'm just trying some different techniques out to see what I get. If I go up to File, you're going to see that we've had forever and a day in Photoshop what's called Close All, and we've got our shortcut there. I'm sure a lot of you have in the past had to just, you're done for the day with Photoshop, and you just want to close everything you got and say, I don't want to save it. I was just messing around or working on things, etc. Well, if you choose File, Close All, you're going to see in Photoshop CS5 we have this Apply to All selection, which I love. It means that every image I have, I can close all and say don't save once, and it does it for all the images that are open. So I'll just say don't save, and it closes all of them, which is great. All right, let me go back over to MiniBridge. I'm going to open up another file that we've got. Let me go back to my folder, and we're going to take a look at working with some other little things that we can do in here, which are really kind of cool. I'm going to show you some different things for, and these are going to be quick techniques, but working with, let's say, selections and straightening and things like that. I'm going to go back out to my desktop, and I'm going to grab a different file here. Here's a quick one. I've done this before several times. If you've seen webinars, way in the past, I've showed some of this, but I think this is worth repeating. Doing cropping. We've all cropped, right? Well, I want to show you some things that you can do with cropping that is a little bit surprising. With cropping, we can go in and work with cropping perspective. We can add canvas area to an image. We can rotate. We can do a lot of different things with that. If you have an image, and let's suppose that I've got something like this, and what I want to do is maybe not distort it any longer. Well, we do have some new methods for doing that in CS5, but one of the standbys is working with the crop tool. Now, if I go to the crop tool, and I'm going to show you something here real quick that I always just kind of skip over, but if you have a tool selected in the Tools panel over here, and let's suppose that you want to do something like crop real quick, and then go back to the Move tool. Well, a lot of us are familiar with the fact that we have shortcuts, and let me zoom in a little bit over here. Hopefully you can all see this. we have letter modifier keys or keys that if you press them, you go to that tool. So if I have the move tool selected and I press the letter C, it goes to the crop tool, right? Well, if I do this instead, I want to just use the crop tool quickly and then get rid of it. If you do something like press the C key, go out and crop and, whoops, sorry, let me zoom out. You do your thing. This is not working very well. Hold on. You hold on the C key, you crop, you do your thing. If I then go in and let go of the key, it's going to go back to the original tool. These are called spring-loaded shortcuts. So if you go to just about anything, like let's say B for brush, hold it down, let go of the B, you go back to the other tool. Quick little spring-loaded shortcut. If I go to the crop tool here, I'm going to actually go to the crop tool, so I'm going to press the letter C. I'll go in and crop, I'll click and drag. And what we can do, like I said, is we can crop in perspective. If you look up at the top, you'll see that we have this perspective selection, which is not turned on by default. If you set your crop, select perspective, go in and do something like this, you can go in and actually drag and try and make it parallel to all the different sides. And this is where I kind of, if I do this too quickly, it just doesn't work right. But I'll just kind of quickly eyeball it. We go in and draw them parallel to the side, something like this, and this is a little off, that's fine. If you then press Enter or Return, you're going to see it's going to try and pull it into square, so to speak, and crop it at the same time. Excuse me. So we can use perspective cropping if we want to. Now, another thing we can do, I use more than you'd expect, is to go in and, let's say, crop. So let's say I set a crop for the whole image, the whole object here, the whole canvas area. You can actually drag the crop further than the canvas area is right now. You can even use shortcut or modifier keys like holding down Alt on Windows or Option on Mac and drag both sides, let's say. And if I go and drag out further than the actual canvas area and press Enter or Return, it adds canvas area. So you can add canvas area pretty easily that way too, instead of going to, let's say, canvas size, that type of thing. Let me undo that. You'll notice that the edge, the outside, the extra canvas area was white. Well, if I go over to the Layers panel and I unlock the layer by Option or Alt, double-clicking on the thumbnail, and then I go to my crop here and use my Option key to do both sides, let's say. Now, this is, of course, you're not cropping to an exact size using this type of method, but I'll hit Enter Return. You'll see that it now has the checkerboard. That's because I unlocked the background layer. That's why. All right. There's also a lot of different things that you do with cropping. You can actually crop to a width, a height, and a resolution, which is really pretty cool, a great feature. If you're, let's say, cropping to 72 ppi for web images, that sort of thing, that can be pretty handy as well. All right. I'll keep this open. So just a few little techniques, things that you can work on with cropping. Let me open up in MiniBridge here. I'm going to go to another file and show you another couple of techniques here. This one's pretty simple, actually. This one's kind of cool where I want to create a drop shadow for this guy. So I'm going to create a realistic three-dimensional drop shadow that, let's say the sun is coming, excuse me, probably coming from over here, I don't know. But I want to create a drop shadow that fades off into the distance. Well, let me show you a method for that. I'm going to go over to my background layer in the Layers panel and unlock it. I'm going to make a selection of the guy. Now, the selection does not have to be perfect. I'm going to go over to my Quick Select tool and just run down and make a selection of him. I can change my brush size with the shortcuts that we saw earlier. And I'm going to try and make this a little bit more professional here. Let me make it a little bit smaller. There we go. Run down the arm, get the hand. I'm going to use Alt or Option to get rid of some of the selection. Now, since this is demo, I don't have to get crazy. Let me get rid of some of that. Let me add his shoulder back in. I can't help it. I can't stop. Anyway, let me get the shoe, get rid of the middle here. I'm going a little quick. I apologize. I'm just going in, like I said, making a selection here. So let me get rid of some of this. Stop, Brian, stop. Okay. Now, what we're going to do is we're going to make a copy of the layer, and we're going to use the layer style that's a drop shadow. Of course, if you're doing this, for money, what you're going to do is you're going to make sure that you've got the selection looking pretty good using a lot of different techniques, okay? I'm going to make a copy of the layer, and this could be a masked copy. You could do all sorts of things here if you want to, but I'm just going to press Command-J or Control-J. You can see that I've got the guy cut out. Rough cut, doesn't have to be perfect. You can see I've made some mistakes. That's okay. I can clean them up if I need to right now. Now what I'm going to do is once you get the thing you want to put a drop shadow on separated from the background. Using any method you know, we're then going to put a layer style drop shadow. So I'll come to layer styles here. Whoops, easy. Let me put it back there. Come to my layer styles down at the bottom down here. And with that layer selected, I'm going to go in and add a drop shadow. Okay. Now you can, of course, set whatever you want here. And when we work with a drop shadow as a layer style, one of the great things I love is the fact that you can go out here and just drag it around instead of having to set all the settings in there. I'll drag it down here a little bit, get it below the foot, or set with the foot there. Excuse me. All right. I'll click OK. Now, this looks really dumb. I know. You're all thinking, what are you doing? This is not how a shadow looks. I know. But what we're going to do is we're going to go in, and I could have used a couple methods here, but we're going to go in and take this and transform it. The problem is this drop shadow is basically a layer style. It's an effect. So I can't go in and really do much transforming to it. So we could have filled the layers, a lot of things we could have done. But using this method, here's what we're going to do. I'm going to take that layer style and turn it into an actual layer. So with the layer, with the style, the drop shadow applied to it, selected, I'll come up to layer, and you'll see in here that we've got our adjustment layers and all that stuff out here. What I'll do is you can see layer style right here. Here's all the layer styles, same thing we saw as in the layers panel over there. You'll see create layer. So if I click on that, what it's going to do is it's going to give me a warning here saying, well, some of the layer styles will not do this. They won't work. They won't reproduce. Okay? So you just have to take that into consideration. But the drop shadow will. So I will click OK. And like I said, we could have, some of you are like, oh, you could save a step. You could do this 50 ways. Yes, you can. But sometimes this can make a neater shadow. It makes a layer out of the shadow. I can then go in and press, let's say I go to the Move tool, I can transform it. So if I press Command-T to transform content, or Control-T on Windows, you can then hold down Command, and this is kind of interesting. If you ever do transforming, if you hold down the Command key, what you can do is you can then adjust these points independently. I just kind of messed that up, but I'll go to the middle point here, middle top bounding point, press Command, click and drag down, and we can create the shadow here. Now, you are going to be as realistic as you want. I don't know which way the sun's going. You might need to flip it. I don't know. It's your call. But for right now, I'll just say that looks great. I'll press Enter or Return. We got ourselves a shadow. Now, the last step is to make it look a little more realistic. We can blur it. If we had a mask, we could blur the mask. We can also go in and make it a gradient so that it kind of fades away. So with the shadow layer selected, I'll put a mask on it. Click on Mask. I'm just going to go to the Gradient tool right now. There's a lot of ways you can do this, but I'll press the letter G to go to Gradient. That selects the Gradient tool over here on the left. It also typically will set up a pretty simple black to white gradient. That's what we need. Now, if you've created your own and you're working on a bunch of different stuff, you might need to select a black and white gradient up here. That's fine. And then I'm going to go in and just click and drag across and set the gradient up so it looks the way I want it. So there's a lot of things you can do here. We can do a blur on it. We can make it so it's not quite as dark, you know. Excuse me, sorry. But anyway, we're setting up a mask. We're creating ourselves a nice little drop shadow. And it's kind of a simpler drop shadow that you can make look really realistic. You can set blending modes on it. You can do all sorts of different things and get it to look decent. All right. So that's another technique, kind of cool, something different you can work with. Let me do this. I'm going to show you something here I think that is kind of cool as well. Sometimes we want to be able to create a composite layer, meaning we want to be able to go in and say, you know what, I want to like compress all the layers into a single layer because I need to use it somewhere in a project or something else. Well, if you have a layers panel and you got a bunch of layers, let me pull this out. You got a bunch of layers, and what you want to do is you want to make what's called a composite layer. You can do that pretty easily. If I go in and I press, let me do it again. I hold down what's called the claw. Okay, this is kind of weird. All the layers in the layer stack, what you can do, if you press Command-Option-Shift and press the letter E as an egg, what it can do is it'll create what's called a composite layer. That composite layer, if I turn all the other layers off, is basically just a flattened version of the image. So sometimes you need that, depending on what you're working on. Of course, we want to keep the original, that sort of thing. But That's a great way to be able to create a composite. You can also do that through the menus, and there's a lot of ways to get that done, but that's one technique for doing that. It's kind of cool. So Command-Option-Shift, the letter E. All right, let me reset my workspace. We got it back. I'm going to close all of my files here using File Close All. You can see it right there, and say don't save to any of them. And there we go. All right, I'm going to go back to Mini Bridge, and I want to show you, like I said, a couple other little techniques that I think are really useful. I want to use some smart sharpening and different things like that on different images. So real quick, I'm going to do this. I'm going to open up a beach picture that we've got. No reason why I have this open. I just think it's a good picture for what I'm about to do. If you've ever, let's say some of you, I know a lot of us have used levels and curves and, you know, all sorts of different adjustment techniques, and you're probably even familiar with using the adjustment layers, which are really useful. I don't know how many of you have ever used, if you go up to the adjustments here, the shadows highlights feature. Now, I don't get to use this every day. I don't get to use this all the time. As a matter of fact, what I'll do a lot of times in professional jobs is I'll set up masks and different things and, you know, kind of create and work on my images the way I want to. But shadow highlights is sort of a one-stop shop for taking an image that has, let's say, you know, darker areas that need to be lightened, lighter areas that need to be darkened, or both, and it does the quote-unquote masking for you. It kind of does all this stuff for you. You're not going to be able to use this on every image. It's just not going to work. But for some images, it does a pretty good job. The thing is with shadow highlights, you can't use an adjustment layer for it, which means if I do this, if I click on shadow highlights, let's say, to apply this, it's going to say, all right, cool, let's do it. You can see it's already affecting the shadows. I can lighten, I can darken, I could use highlights, you know, darker, brighter, that sort of thing. But if I click OK, it's done. That's it. There's no mask. There's nothing you can go back to work on and say, okay, well, here's what I did, right? Well, let me undo that. Matter of fact, I don't know how many of you have used history before. I'm sure just about everybody has. But I'm going to go back in history here, use my undos. If we want to be able to use something like shadow highlights, or if you've ever used filters, which I'm sure everybody has, blurs, sharpens, things like that, and you want to be able to go back in time and undo them or change them, what we can do is we can use what are called smart filters. Now, smart filters have a couple cool things you can do with them, and I want to show you this. Before you edit your image, before you do certain moves to it, let's say like applying certain filters or applying a couple of the adjustments over there, you can choose Convert for Smart Filters. What that'll do, if I ignore this dialog box like I always do, it will turn the image layer, the layer that you're working on, into a smart object. How many of you are familiar with smart objects? But essentially what it does is it takes the image data and embeds it. So if you scale this thing 100 times, it's not going to lose image quality. Okay, it's basically not destroying and creating pixels, things like that. That's the idea. I don't care about that. But if I go up to Filter now and I say Convert for Smart, it turns it into a smart object, a one layer. If I go, let's say I use something simple. I want to sharpen. I'll use a Smart Sharpen, for instance. I go in and sharpen the image, and I'm going to crank this up a bit so you can see it. This is going to be way too much, but I'll sharpen it. You'll see the sharpening. I'll click OK. A lot of us know that if we do sharpening or blurring, once you do it, you're done, right? You got to use undo or, you know, save a copy or save a layer copy, something like that. Well, if you use smart filters, you can see over on the right here in the layers panel, if I move it over, that we now have the smart sharpen that we can turn on and off. We also have literally the ability to do multiple filters if we want to. You also have a mask, which means this white box right here, if you take a look, let me zoom in, that is a mask, which means I can go to my brush tool, let's say, and literally, whoops, it's jumping around a little bit, I can mask out parts of this and say I only want to affect part of it. And you can see right there on the mask that that's what it's doing.